Mary here at Mary's Heirloom Seeds, and welcome to another fun live chat here on my YouTube channel. It has been a little bit of a crazy week. We are gearing up to get planting. I'm super excited. We've had some warm weather, so I'll get into that in just a second. For those of you just joining me, welcome. For those of you joining me as my regulars, welcome back. I am Mary at Mary's Heirloom Seeds, and I try to go live here every Thursday night at 5 p.m. Central Time. So I'm just going to double check some stuff here, make sure I've got you. Okay, so if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit the thumbs up on our video while we chat today. While I'm chatting today, feel free to ask your questions. Do try to keep it on topic as far as garden and seed related, but thank you. Hey Inga, hey Nate, thanks for joining us. So tonight's topic is so easy. I wanted to share with you some of the easier crops to grow, and more so not just easy, but quick. So before I get started, in the description section of this video, you will find links to lots of information that I've shared and created for you guys so that you can have more information to grow a healthy garden. You'll find my comprehensive planting guide. That is amazing. There's tons of information. I've had customers reach out to me with multiple questions, and I'm able to share that planting guide, and it answers almost all of their questions. So definitely a really great resource for you to check out. Now, why are we talking about quick crops? This kind of stemmed from a Facebook comment I had. Someone had mentioned, hey Tammy, thanks for joining us, welcome. Someone commented on our Facebook page and they said that sometimes they really like, hey David, they really like something that's more of an instant gratification in the garden. And I totally get it. Hey Krista, there isn't necessarily a almost forgot the time. Me too, actually. You get me all dirty and in my dirty muddy boots today. I'm working out in the garden. It's finally warm. So last week, if you joined me, sorry, totally sidetracked. Last week, if you joined me, I was in a sweatshirt and my big heavy coat. It was cold and I was freezing. Now it's still windy out, but yesterday it was in the 80s. Today it was in the 60s, 70s. So it's really nice out. As soon as I'm done here, I'll probably throw my flannel off and go finish working out in the garden with what I was doing. If you don't follow me on Facebook, and if you're not on social media, you may not realize I'm adding a brand new garden. It's approximately, I haven't measured it just other than an estimate with my boots. I have short feet, so I have to figure that out. It's approximately 42 feet by 18 feet. So as soon as I finish in the seed shop, I am going out into the garden to add more space. So I'm clearing space. I'm collecting all the limbs that had fallen from our freeze. I'm going to make biochar out of it. So I have my work cut out for me. I also, for those of you that are kind of local, hey Hoglegs, for those of you that are kind of local, I will be at the Gregg County Master Gardeners event on Saturday, March 4th. I'm almost positive it's March 4th. I will be there. I will be speaking about container gardening. We're going to talk about some of the easy ways that you can container garden. I'll also have seeds there and some free stuff for whoever shows up and wants to say hi. That's going to be an awesome event. So, sorry, totally got sidetracked there. The reason I wanted to talk about easy or fast crops to grow is sometimes it's nice to have slightly more instant gratification in the garden. And I've said it before, it's a garden, not a microwave. Nothing happens overnight other than, except sometimes you plant some seeds and they pop up and you're super excited the next day. I still get excited when my seeds germinate. So when you're growing things like corn or squash, like not summer squash, but winter squash. Summer squash is fast. It's like 55, 60 days, 65 days. Winter squash can be like 100, 110 days. Same with pumpkins. So when you're growing something for so long, it feels like forever. It's not really that long, but Amina says, do you sell heirloom seeds? Absolutely. In the description section of this video, you will find a link to my website, which is marysheirloomseeds.com. If you have questions that I don't answer during my video, you can send an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com and I will answer. So sometimes you want something that's more instant gratification. So I thought I would share with you some of the easier crops that are fast maturing that you can plant. Some of them are cool tolerant. I mentioned last week, is it too early to plant? And it is not too early to plant for me. Even if we have a cold snap, some of what I planted is still gonna survive a cold snap. My last frost date is March 17th, so I'm a little bit early, but I'm hoping that I get a little longer of a season this year since I got cut short a little bit last year. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about quick maturing veggies that you can plant. Again, oftentimes these are going to be cool weather crops. You can plant them in the spring or the fall. But if you want to get a jump start on your garden, or you really want to plant a lot of different things, but you want some stuff that's you can harvest right away, that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So the very top of my list is dwarf pak choi. It is a tiny Chinese cabbage. It is absolutely fantastic. It's a dwarf version of the regular pak choi. Sometimes you see it in the store, but depending on where you are, we're pretty rural here and there isn't a large selection of vegetables. So you will definitely not see dwarf pak choi in the grocery store. Krista says, I started my cucumbers in the small 6-pack containers and they're now about 3 inches high. Oops, I missed part of that. Only 2 leaves. Can I still transfer them into larger containers without losing them? Absolutely. Sometimes they can get a little root bound and they don't thrive, so I highly recommend planting them in something a little larger, or transplanting them into something larger. So dwarf pak choi tops my list of quick maturing crops. It's about 33 days. Sometimes it takes a little longer. The seeds can germinate in anywhere from 3 to 7 days. Krista says, I grew that pak choi and it was awesome doing small and large this year. Awesome. So that's one you can plant, the dwarf and the full size, and you've got the dwarf that matures at about 33 days and the full size at about 55 days. So that's still a pretty quick crop. Inga says, I grew baby bok choy, but with the heat here, they bolted. Yeah, so now I'm going to grow 5,000 accidentally. So yes, they are not a cool tolerant crop. Or, I'm sorry, they're not a heat tolerant crop. They are a cool tolerant crop. That's a mouthful. So that tops my list because not only is it easy, it's versatile. You can eat it raw, you can cook it in stir fry. It freezes well sometimes depending on what you're using it in. So that tops my list is dwarf pak choi at fun crops that mature quickly. Number 2 on my list is radish. Now, depending on which variety of radish you're planting will also determine how quickly it is mature. Okay, daikon radish is more like 55 days. Cherry bell radish is more like 28 to 33 days. So if you're looking for something that is cool tolerant, radish. If you're looking for something that's heat tolerant, daikon radish or German giant radish. For those of you in Florida, I know Inga's in Florida. The other David is also in Florida. For heat tolerant, I highly recommend the daikon radish or the German giant radish. So those can be harvested fairly quickly. I love radish, and Inga, on that note, if you do have 5,000 that you accidentally germinate, you don't always have to thin them and toss them. You can eat those thinnings. I highly recommend it. It would be considered microgreen. So people pay big money for microgreens that they grow or that they buy in the store that someone's grown. You can get those right out of your garden. I have at marysheirloomseeds.com in the sprouting section, you can buy onions in bulk and use them for microgreens, and they are fantastic. So 3rd on my list is microgreens. You can do radish, which we sell bulk seeds. You can do broccoli. You can do alfalfa, and you can even do black oil sunflower and onions. So microgreens are another excellent option. Inga says, oh, good idea. Does radish flavor change the longer you keep it growing? So I have found that the radish sprouts that I pull out, when I thin my beds and I eat them, they are spicy, but not as spicy. And I wouldn't necessarily say that leaving them growing longer makes them spicier. It really just depends on the variety. So daikon radish is spicy. French breakfast radish is not so spicy. So Angela says, thank you for Florida suggestions. In the description section of this video, I mentioned you will find my comprehensive planting guide. In that guide is 3 Florida specific guides. I narrowed it down to southern, central, and northern. So, and I have grown in Southern California, so I completely understand the interesting back and forth with pests and the weather and the heat. So definitely check out my Florida planting guides if you're in Florida. No matter where you are, I've got a planting guide for your area in the U.S. I haven't ventured past the U.S. because I don't have that much knowledge, but I do try to help where I can. So we mentioned dwarf pak choi is my number 1. We mentioned radish is my number 2. David says, I love my French breakfast, early scarlet globe, and Cincinnati market radish. Awesome. Those are all fantastic varieties. Then number 3 is microgreens. Now, it's not your typical vegetable. It's actually a full-grown plant if you use those seeds that way. So I have had customers say, hey, do you offer anything in bulk? Those are the only bulk options I have, and that is in microgreens. You can grow it as a microgreen, or you can grow it to full size. Either one totally works. Now, 4th on my list is lettuce. So lettuce can also be used as a microgreen, but it can also be used as a cut and come again, it's called. So for example, if you have a lettuce, let's say little gem lettuce, you can harvest some of the leaves. You don't have to harvest the whole plant, and you can get multiple pickings from a single plant. Or you can do something like spreading them over a larger area and then just pulling them out as a microgreen at, say, it wouldn't necessarily be considered a microgreen, but you're talking about 20 to 40 days. So lettuce is another fantastic variety that you can start picking early depending on what crop you're growing. My gourmet greens mix and my leaf lettuce mix, both of those are fantastic if you want a variety in a single pack. Say you don't want 6 different packs of lettuce or 4 different packs of lettuce. Those 2 varieties are a mix, pre-mixed in a pack. So you can have multiple varieties in one, and you just need to make sure that you spread it out a little bit so you give it a little more space. Swiss chard, David mentioned, isn't on my list of fast maturing crops because I kind of neglected it, even though Swiss chard is probably going to be my next week's topic, so I didn't want to include it in this one. Swiss chard takes a little longer to mature, but once it matures, holy man, it is crazy. It can take off. Let's see. Inga says you keep the core intact of lettuce, and it's a gift that keeps on giving. Exactly. So I had a Swiss chard grow 5 feet tall. David actually asked me which is the most cool tolerant of the Swiss chards that I carry, and that would be hands down Fort Hook Giant. However, it's called Giant for a reason. It grew 5 feet tall, and it was producing seeds for me, which is why it grew so tall. If you were just growing it to eat it, you would have chopped it down around 3 feet. You wouldn't necessarily be growing it 5 feet tall, and probably about 3 feet wide as well. So anyway, getting sidetracked again. So we did mention pak choi, lettuce, microgreens, radish. Next up on my list is beets. Now, that's a touchy subject for some people. Why, I have no idea, but not everybody likes to eat beets. My mom does not like beets. Doc does not like beets. I love beets, but they're a double duty crop. And I say that in some of my other videos and articles because what that means to me is I can eat the leaves and I can eat the root. So even if you don't like to eat beets, there's a lot of people that actually grow them just for the greens. So you can continue, just like Inga said, with the lettuce, you can harvest the leaves on a regular basis and it will continue to grow greens. You can have this massive beet underneath the soil and it will continue to produce greens. So I really like that. I like that beets can also be used as animal fodder. So if you have larger animals, beets are a fantastic crop for them as well. Some farmers just plant the beets and allow the animals to just graze through. First they go for the greens and then they dig up. The next crop of animals will graze on the beets. So it just depends on what you're growing, why you're growing it. I've talked about animal fodder in the past. We talked about it when I was live at Dreamweaver's homestead. I was there for like an hour talking to them. It was so much fun. But we talked about growing animal fodder, and with the amount of animal feed going up, any way you can supplement is a great way to do it. So beets are on my list of, not only are they easy, but they are fast maturing. You're talking about 55 days approximately, but you can start eating the greens sooner. So if you're only growing them for the greens, you can actually start harvesting about 30 days. So there you go. Hopefully you learned something new today with the beets. If you didn't, if you already knew, awesome. So we've got a lot of different varieties that you can grow that are faster maturing to give you a little more of an instant gratification in your garden instead of waiting all that time. And Inga says, and they kind of till your soil. Absolutely. So if you have, Belinda says, can you grow beets next to a banana plant? Now that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm willing to admit when I don't know the answer. I'm not as familiar with growing banana trees. I know Jason at Pepe's Plants. He's in Florida. I know him personally. I met him at the Yellow Green Farmers Market when I had a booth there with Mary's Heirloom Seeds. I would definitely reach out to him and ask. Because it's a root crop. Inga says I don't think so. Because it's a root crop, I wouldn't plant it around trees. Just me in particular. Hey, Valita, thanks for joining us all the way over there. So, just to give you just a couple examples, I don't usually plant root crops around trees, and I usually avoid trees in particular when I'm growing vegetables because I'm going to be pulling them up and I don't really want to disturb the soil around that. Sometimes you can just cut it right at the soil line and you're good. Hey, Bushcraft family, thank you and welcome for joining us. But to answer your question a little more specifically, I would reach out to somebody who specializes in banana trees. They would have a better answer for you. All right, so we talked about dwarf pak choi. We talked about radish. We talked about microgreens. We talked about lettuce. And then we talked about beets. So next up on my list, I touched on it earlier today, and that is scallop squash. Summer squash generally produces faster than winter squash. But if you have seen my video, it was titled 42 Days. I was able to harvest, I think it was white scallop squash in 42 days. Literally from the time I planted the seed till the time that I harvest it was 42 days. And sometimes you say, well, you know, tomatoes are 80 days, but it actually takes 100 days depending on where you are and where you're starting your seeds. This was literally from seed to in my kitchen eating it 42 days. So I highly recommend if you're looking for something quick maturing that is maybe even a little more substance, because lettuce is good, pak choi is good, but squash can really give you a big bang for your buck as far as in the garden. As far as using that space, you can get several pounds of squash from a single plant. Or if you're planting black beauty zucchini, you can get a whole lot of pounds from a single plant. But scallop squash is one of my favorites as far as a fast maturing. We have Benning's green tint scallop squash. We have white scallop squash. We have yellow custard squash. We've got a yellow scallop squash. So there's quite a few varieties on my website that you can check out, read about them, figure out what might be best for your area. But I like the white scallop squash. It was a small bush variety, so it didn't take up a lot of space in my garden, and it started producing fast. So that's one of the varieties that I'll be planting in my garden tomorrow. It's supposed to be in the 70s. No, sorry. It's supposed to be in the 50s here tomorrow. But then it's supposed to be 70s on Saturday. So, and we've got rain coming. So I really want to get some things planted. Even if I lose them to freeze, I'll still have some that remain. And I am itching to get in the garden. The weather here has been really good lately, and it's really hard to have the winter blues during the December and January. I really want to get out in the garden. So here I am. All right, so last on my list is beans. Belita says positive thinking. I like it. Fingers crossed we don't have a hard freeze, but yes, I'm just gonna plant it, and if it lives, awesome. If it doesn't, I'll start it all over again. But at least I get my hands dirty. I love digging in the soil. I up potted my tomatoes, and I just felt so much better. David says it was 80 degrees here in Maryland. I've been out prepping the garden and cleanup. I have been watching your garden prep and your garden expansion, and I'm really excited for you. David, you've got such a great spot to add to your garden. So last on my list is beans. Now, beans are going to take the longest of everything that I've mentioned to you already, but specifically bush beans generally take a little less time to start producing. Now, the reason I'm adding beans, it's not necessarily the bottom of the list, but today it's at the bottom of my list for fast maturing crops because it does take a little longer than radish, but it is also productive. So beans are really nice. Bush beans, I'm going to specify, because pole beans or dry beans generally take a little longer to mature. So Krista says, I put in my strawberries, cover them for tonight just in case. So bush beans, jade bush bean is my all-time favorite. If you follow me on social media, if you've seen some of my random posts, you know that bush beans are easy to grow, and jade bush beans are my favorite. I make dilly beans out of them. And the cool thing about those are you can stagger your planting. Now, you can plant beds and beds of beans, and that's great, but you can also stagger your planting. So you can plant a bed or half a bed right now, and then in 2 weeks you can plant the other half, and then another 2 weeks you can plant another half, or a month. You can stagger your planting. It's called succession planting, and that way you are not having 100 bean plants, or I don't know, I think a pack has 25 or 35 seeds in it. So that way you don't have all of them maturing at one time and all of them producing at one time. Unless, of course, you have a big family and you need to feed everybody at once, or you're canning it. Like I mentioned, the dilly beans, I like to can those. So I do plant an awful lot of dilly beans. Jade beans for dilly beans. See where my brain's at right now? So beans are last on my list, not necessarily because I don't like them. I love them. It's just that they take a little longer than the other varieties that I mentioned today. I think jade bush beans, I started harvesting around 55 days last year, and they continued to harvest for a couple weeks. And then they really had trouble because we had a lot of heat. But I also did a side by side, and I had Blue Lake bush beans on one half of the bed, and I had jade beans on the other half of the bed. And the jade beans held up better in the heat. Last year, our heat was pretty difficult in the summertime, and they survived. The Blue Lake bush beans did well, but not as well as the jade, and they didn't produce as much as the jade. So I just kind of proved the point that I liked a more productive bean. That's not to say that you can't grow Blue Lake bush beans. It is probably our #1 selling bush bean at Mary's Heirloom Seeds because it is a famous variety. So if you are looking to grow a bush bean this year, I highly recommend checking out not only the Blue Lake bush bean, but also the jade bush bean. So that is it for my video today on quick maturing or faster maturing veggies. Like I said before, it's a garden, not a microwave. It is really nice to spend a little time out here and have patience. Sometimes we spend so much time going, and we just want to rush things, but there's literally no rushing things in the garden. It will happen when it happens, and there's only so much you can do about it. So if you are looking for some varieties to grow that will give you a little more of a instant gratification, the varieties I mentioned today are fantastic. If you have questions, like I mentioned earlier, you can send me an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com. Miss Lee says, question, what is your favorite flower to grow? Calendula, hands down, my favorite. It is fantastic for pollinators. I can grow it in the spring and I can plant a second crop in the fall. It is medicinal. If you haven't already, definitely check out my calendula infused oil recipe. You can find it in my comprehensive planting guide that's in the links in the description. There's also a video you can watch as well. It is the easiest recipe that I have. Calendula isn't the easiest to grow, but it is my favorite. If I had to pick one, that's really hard. Because zinnia and sunflowers are like number 2 and number 3, and in no particular order. I love zinnias because they're beautiful and they attract different pollinators like bumblebees and butterflies. And I love sunflowers because as the sun goes, their faces go to the sun. So I really like that kind of weird aspect of the garden. But if I had to pick one, calendula. Alrighty, everybody, I'm gonna head inside. Sun's kind of going down a little bit. Like I said before, check out my website. It's marysheirloomseeds.com. Check out the comprehensive planting guide in the description of the video. And if you still have questions, you can always send me an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com. I'm Mary from Mary's Heirloom Seeds, signing off, and happy planting, everybody.